It appears that many businesses and corporations are slowly being exposed for how effective and valid their business model is. And some have shown to be corrupt and may not have a solid business foundation. Business models are being held up to scrutiny over the last couple of years, and I predict that this process will continue for a few more years until real changes are made or there's a shift in consciousness. With changing technology and a changed environment, including better educated and larger accessible markets, do you find many startups being created with business models? Because I read a blog post the other day by an entrepreneur saying that you cannot extend your personal moral code to business. At the end of the day, it's just about profits. And as a Tibetan Buddhist, we believe in having right livelihood and making a real difference through work and encompassing our moral code. I know in your book, The Monk and the Riddle, you take a more holistic view too. Do you still continue to see success with startups while they serve their customers and honour their moral codes? And there's two questions there.
It's a good set of questions, though. I can't imagine divorcing my values and my principles from my work. Business, in the final analysis, is simply a tool by which we achieve some good. We achieve a good for our customers, we achieve a good for our employees, hopefully we achieve a good for our communities. It's only a set of tools, and it's only as useful as the good it creates. I'm not a business person because I love the notion of being able to win at somebody else's expense, or to sell something that somebody else doesn't need, or to profit where somebody else is actually losing in the transaction. I love business because of the value it creates, and that value has to have values attached to it. And if it becomes a shortcut for buying low and selling high, then in fact it's not very valuable to society. It's not very useful. It becomes very selfish. And I don't think business at its heart needs to be selfish, though unfortunately the way it's practiced, we harness the greed of business to accomplish prosperity and to achieve success. And that's a very fine line between what we think about as value and what we think about as valuable. So first and foremost, I would say I cannot condone the divorcing of principles and values from the concept of business. I think that the two go hand in hand. I also think that the notion of business model is often misunderstood. A lot of what was seen as rickety in the last internet bubble was the lack of business models. The reality was that there were a lot of things that were at fault. Business models very often aren't very evident early on as you create value. Oftentimes that value, particularly in things like internet media, internet content, is not directly transactable. You're not going to get somebody to pay you for the minutes or hours or days of content consumption that they may actually get off the net. You have to have a very sophisticated business model in order to be able to profit and sustain that content. And so it's not uncommon in my business to back a company who has identified a great problem, who has a particularly compelling solution, but still does not have a way of capturing the value that is clear. We look at a company like Twitter. We look at a company like Facebook 4 or 5 years ago. Facebook didn't have a business model that was very evident, other than at very, very large scale. And we're seeing a business model evolve there. Twitter, we'll see whether a business model evolves there. But clearly there's value created because we see so many people using it for such a diverse set of purposes. So I think it's important to keep business models in context. It is okay to start a business without a clear sense of how you're going to capture the value. What's not clear and what's not okay is to create a business where you're not resolving a problem and creating the value. If you create the value, then you can constitute a business model, hopefully, that will support the business. If you create a business that doesn't create value, but simply means to profit, that is a fundamentally flawed business.
Okay. And that's really clear. And would you still see the success? I guess what you're saying is that we're in a state of flux at the moment with business and business models. And is it still viable that businesses or startups are successful if they have honoured their sort of moral code? Do you think?
I certainly believe so, but that doesn't make them viable. It may make them successful in the context of the entrepreneur's vision, but it may not make them viable. And the two need to come together. The idea of profitability is a law of physics in business. When we think about how we build businesses today in a dynamic market like the United States, profitability is a foregone conclusion, because without it, you're not in control of your destiny. You can't continue to deliver your value. You need to have a model that provides for that profitability. But that business model may not be clear. In the newest book that John Mullins and I just wrote, called Getting to Plan B, we talk about building businesses with unclear business models, where the problem is very clear, the value creation is very clear, the business model evolves, and it evolves in a very disciplined way, but it evolves without necessarily having been part of the initial plan.
Must get that book. Giga recently did a video interview with Chris Dixon, co-founder of Hunch, where he takes the position that the VC model is broken. Have you seen that video?
No, but I know Chris Dixon.
Yeah. So just to give you background, he basically said that VCs raise the valuation of startups and put more money to work on the fixed percentage ownership basis. And he believes that any market where a buyer is arguing for a higher price, then something is wrong with that market. He said that 20% is taken out in management fees for VCs, and he used the word carry, 20%.
Yes.
Is that right? I
That's
got
right.
that correct? 20% profits. So effectively all the money is made in management fees because the industry hasn't made any profits to date. And he said that they need to justify their funds to LPs, so they need to put their money to work. What are your ideas about the venture capital industry model now? I know that you actively work with startups as a virtual CEO, so you may have a different perspective.
Well, I think Chris is right that the venture industry is stressed at the moment. And it's stressed by the fact that there haven't been a lot of liquidity events, particularly IPOs, in the last decade. That's a long dry patch for the venture business. The venture business works by raising money from large institutions, most often endowments and pensions at a place like Kleiner Perkins, and wealthy individuals, putting that money to work in high-risk ventures, and then harvesting the successes in an IPO or a healthy merger and acquisitions market, and then redistributing that money to the investors who then invest in your next fund. And in the process, the venture capitalist profits both by taking in annual fees for the management of that fund, as well as sharing in the upside. That's called the carry. In a market like we've been in today, there's been very little positive carry to the venture capital business because there hasn't been much liquidity. I would argue that the thing that is probably most broken in the venture capital business today is the lack of liquidity. If there was a great deal of liquidity in the market, even a reasonable amount of liquidity like there was in the early 90s before the boom, I think we would find a very healthy environment where there's disciplined investment, an appropriate amount of investment, and the right amount of work being done to build and harvest these businesses. But today, we don't live in that environment, and so it's much more challenging to put that money effectively to work. Add that to, I think, Chris's insight that a lot of the consumer internet companies don't need a lot of capital to test out their ideas. And you're in an environment where it's very hard to invest large funds. Here at Kleiner Perkins, we invest not just in consumer internet, which we are enthusiastic about, but we invest in a whole bunch of other things we call digital technology, financial services, book rentals, you name it, we invest in it. as well as in green tech, where large sums are still required in order to be able to launch ideas because of the amount of research and development and the timelines and scale of those projects, as well as life science. So a lot of what we hear about what's broken in the venture capital business ties to two things. The consumer internet and the challenges of investing in a market where only small amounts are necessary to test ideas, and in the lack of liquidity. At places like Kleiner Perkins, we have a much broader purview than that. And so we're investing for the long term, expecting that we will create value and expecting that there'll be an opportunity to harvest that value and making sure that we've got the capital to get from here to there. Ultimately, the limited investors in these venture capital funds get to vote with their feet. If venture capital is not producing an outsized return for the risk that they take on, which is outsized risk, then the limited partners do not need to invest in the second, third, fourth funds that these venture capitalists are put together. And that will, by necessity, sort of reduce the amount of competition and help to discipline the market around returns.
Thank you.